Hello everyone and welcome to this panel on why diversity and inclusion still matter during COVID-19. So we're going to ask the question, do they still matter? Did they ever matter? And joining me today, we've got a fantastic panel of women from all corners of the world. They will introduce themselves each in a moment or two and tell you a little bit about where they are, who they are, and why this is an important topic, and whether they think diversity and inclusion is an important matter and remains an important matter. And you may be thinking, as you look at the panel, you're thinking, oh, well, they're all women. Well, I'll say two things to that. There are many different aspects of diversity, not only gender, but also how many times do you actually see an all-woman panel? So for me, this all-female panel is diversity in itself. So I'm going to ask each of my panelists to introduce themselves, as I say, and we're going to start with Garance, please.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Garance Choko. I'm currently based in New York, in the Financial District. I am the CEO of Coda Societies. Coda Societies is a firm that is helping countries and regions rethink their socio-economic structures. We've been involved in the rethinking and the redesign of national healthcare system, national public administration system. We've been helping building and develop public policy centers and think tanks. And so we are in the business of rethinking societies. Diversity and inclusion, of course, matter, I believe that there are, as you mentioned, Caroline, different definition of diversity. From a racial and gender perspective, diversity is an issue of justice, right? From a sectorial and gender and racial diversity perspective, it is an issue of performance and excellence in an organization. And also, now that we're living in a world that is increasingly global, diversity, both sectorial and gender and racial, are of critical importance in order for companies, organization, and the world to be able to achieve level of excellence. Yeah.
Thank you, Garance. That's great. If I can move on then to Gogo next. So we've had Garance in New York. We're moving over now to Hong Kong. Gogo.
Hi. Thank you, Caroline. This is Gogo from Hong Kong, China. I'm actually the president of the International Association of CFOs and Corporate Treasurers, China. I personally work in a Chinese state-owned enterprise, focusing in Chinese businesses with property development businesses. We have finance business with a bank and also infrastructure businesses. I'm very happy to work in this company because this company always emphasizes a very good culture with good communication with staff, always taking care of our staff, and very good in terms of diversity and inclusion. We have more ladies. Actually, we have more ladies going to the senior ranking as directors or board of directors, taking key roles in the company. I will have more sharing with you later on. Thank you, Caroline.
Thanks very much, Gogo. Lovely. We're going to then now move to the Middle East, to Laura.
Thank you, Caroline. So Laura Ford here. I'm the Senior Treasury Manager at Majid Futtaim. We are a Dubai headquartered retail, real estate and leisure business with operations spanning across 16 countries in the region. And I'm very pleased to be part of this panel today, so thank you. It's an important discussion for two reasons, really. For me personally, because I strongly believe in the ethos of what diversity and inclusion stands for, but also from a business perspective, because I truly believe that diversity and inclusion can be a competitive advantage for an organization. And I think, we should be thinking about it in the same terms that we do financial discipline or operating efficiencies or any other measure of organizational effectiveness. So I'm very pleased to be with you today. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. And I think in conclusion from the introductions, I think we put that question to one side as to whether diversity and inclusion matter at all. I think we all agree that they do matter. And in terms of diversity, there's been fantastic research done quite some time ago by IMD in Switzerland that shows that those diverse teams really outperform non-diverse teams once they've got to understand each other's diversity. That's a really important part of it. And I think inclusion, intuitively, we know anywhere when you're in a group of people, if you don't feel included, how can you perform at your best? That's going to be very, very difficult. So I'd like to, I'll stay with you for a moment, Laura, and just ask you, do you reflect on any examples that you have of where diversity has really worked, and anything you can tell us a little bit more on that particular point?
Sure. I mean, Carolyn, I think the situation that we find ourselves in currently with this global pandemic, it's clear that many industries and companies have been severely disrupted by the pandemic. And I think as a result, many will have to reconsider new ways of doing business. It's clear that what we were doing yesterday may not be the same way that we will do business tomorrow. And so I think companies will naturally need folks with diversity of thought, to be able to problem solve and bring about innovative ideas and strategies of what the new way of business will look like. And so, my hope is that as a result of this situation, companies will going forward look at D&I strategies as an imperative, as opposed to just something that's nice to have or a tick box exercise, perhaps. That's on the diversity side. On the inclusion side, again, to pick up on your point, I think if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that value of human connection, empathy, feeling included and feeling part of something. And I think when people feel included and valued, there is a sense of togetherness, working for the greater good, which is essentially part of human nature, I suppose. And so I think that any leaders or organizations who don't embrace inclusiveness and seek to nurture it are potentially missing a trick, really.
Interesting, isn't it? It has in some ways been a great leveller with people having to meet virtually. It really has, there isn't a head of the table on a Zoom or Teams call, is there? So it's quite fascinating what's been happening there, and we'll return to that point a bit later. But I'd like to move on to one of the other panelists now. Again, all these different aspects of diversity, whether it is race, gender, sexuality, disability, religion, and any sort of point of difference, if you like, are all proxies for a different way of thinking. And maybe if I turn to you, Garance, and somebody who was a concert pianist, now turned chief executive from France, working in New York. You're a great example of somebody with a very diverse background, which is why it's a great privilege to have you on our council at the ACC. But what are some of your thoughts around where diversity and inclusion really works and why they matter?
Yes. Well, thank you. And it's a pleasure and an honor to be part of the ACT Council. It's true that my experience, my identity and my professional experience really scream diversity. I think that the industry where I have witnessed the more openness around sectorial diversity was in the innovation industry. I think that in the United States and throughout the world, we had an emergence of innovation firm, maybe 10 years ago, they became very prevalent. You had big companies such as Addio, Frog Design, Jump, and others that understood that in order to problem solve, in order to create new ideas, what was needed was this generally multi-sectorial approach, right? So having individuals who were who had an artistic background, share idea with individuals who had more of a really true business background, with individuals who had more of a scientific background, and this mixity, of thinking would bring about more interesting, more resilient solutions. So I believe that, like, this diversity of thinking has been appreciated in the private sector, in the innovation industry to begin with. It's been spreading, more and more in diverse like corporation and organization. Now, in terms of like racial and gender diversity, I think it's an issue that is rooted in racism, in politics, in like different culture, and so it's going to take a very long time, for it to be addressed accordingly. To your point, I think like it's wonderful to think that having BIPOC, in your team is something that is important. But if there is no mechanism for true inclusion, and for true decision-making power, it's just marketing. It's not helping, and it's actually perpetrating, like systemic racism and exclusion. I can go ahead on this topic for many hours, but I think that like speaking, really like calling it out, being able to say, if we don't have like people of color and women in decision making, position, if there is not a true look, into like companies' culture, also like in who all the influence within a corporation or in an organization, diversity or inclusion are just, a checkbox, but it's not true change.
And I think, as you say, if people feel something's a checkbox, then they don't buy into it. And sometimes people are scared because they think something's a risk. But I would say, at least try. If you're trying and you're honest and you want to make positive change, then it's a great thing. And to your earlier point on the artistic side as well, is something you and I share a little bit of a common background in this. I was a professional musician as well, and I'm a trained coach. And it's really interesting when I'm talking to treasurers about self-development, personal development, communication, etc. Some of the things that I'm teaching, I'm going back to how you learn an instrument, in my case, and how some of the principles about learning, which is practice, 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 even if it's a non-technical subject, and doing things in short bursts and trying again. And those are all principles that can really, really be valuable within the business context. And so in my podcast series, there's one that's entirely dedicated to that kind of performance learning. And I come back to it again and again. So again, just different experiences we have can contribute in different contexts. I think we'll see, we'll move on to that shortly, but we'll see in these unprecedented times, as they say, things are changing so much, and different kinds of experiences are and will be needed. But I won't hold forth any longer because, like we go off, I could go on all day. So we'll move to Gogo and hear your thoughts, please.
Yes. Thank you, Caroline. I think diversity and inclusion becomes more important compared with the times without the COVID-19. Because since the COVID-19, we can feel there are a lot of disruption, not only in the market, but also, I can say, working from home is a kind of disruption to a lot of people, to a lot of the employees. And some of the employees may be facing some kind of hardship or difficulties in this time of COVID-19, in particular when they are having the quarantine period. I know some of the cases where, like for example, in Hong Kong, I can give an example. For Hong Kong is really a exciting city. It's like a energetic and lively cosmopolitan city. But at the same time, it is a small and tiny city, and with very limited limited supply of land. Some of the less privileged or less wealthy minority, they may need to stay in a small house instead of a reasonable house with a reasonable size, with a house with a reasonable size. And that creates a little bit of problem for them. For example, and you can imagine the kids cannot go to school, they have to stay home. Some of the elderly people, they cannot go to the daily elderly house, and they also stay home. And the working capitals and the working couples will be staying home, etc. All of them may be squeezing in the small house, and they have a kind of pressure, and there will be quite a demand for using computers, etc. And these are all the headache they are or hardship they are facing. It's really the time that companies or business leader have to understand them more, talk to their employees, understand the difficulties, have a sharing with them, and have more concern or more care about what's going on, have a good communication with them, so that those employees who are facing difficulties may be more may feel appreciated or may feel they are really be included, and they feel more happy to 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 work together with other colleagues. So I think after the COVID-19, the diversity and the inclusion become more important than ever. Thank you, Caroline.
Thanks, Gogo. That's a really important point. And they say a virus isn't discriminative, but it actually, in practical terms, it is, because it is the people who, as you described, who find it more difficult working from home because they don't have as much space or connectivity or whatever. But also, we've seen, even in the cases of people, it certainly is, let's say where I am in the UK, of people who have got ill and died from COVID-19, which has often been the minority groups, because they're often working in key worker jobs, and the socio-economic kind of situation, housing, etc., means people are very close together, and all those sorts of things. So again, it's one of those kind of things: the rich get richer and the poor get poorer kind of situations, which is really wrong. And so, as we say, Gogo, where companies can be thinking about how to include people more, and also how we can think ourselves, what can we do to increase social mobility in the workplace, and be more inclusive overall in that aspect. So really, really helpful points there, Gogo. And just in terms of, maybe I'll just move on to Laura, if you had anything to add on that particular area of inclusion.
Yeah, I mean, I think at Majid we're still at a very early stage of the process. I mean, diversity and inclusion is something that we have stated, needs to be on the agenda of the organisation. But we are still at very early stages. At the moment, we are stating our intention in that regard. So what does diversity and inclusion actually mean for us as a business, and what do we want it to stand for? And then we are going through the process of, formalizing that a little bit with, policies and protocols around that. But interestingly enough, rather than it having been sort of put on the back burner, during this pandemic period, it's actually more at the forefront of the conversation. So I think, to the points I was mentioning earlier about the business realizing that now more than ever, it is imperative to have that diversity of thought in innovation and problem solving, etc. That is important for us as a business, and for many businesses. From my personal perspective, I'm very fortunate to be part of a Treasury team that is quite diverse. We're a rather a lean team of 8 Treasury professionals, and we're broadly split about half-half gender-wise, and we are of 7 different nationalities of the 8 of us, of differing ages and educational backgrounds. So I find myself quite fortunate to be working in such a team, but I will say that it has been by design. So we have been intentional through the recruitment process of, ensuring that we have that diversity within the team. as Treasury, we're first and foremost the financial stewards and risk managers of the organisation. So for me, having that diversity of thought, approaching issues from different angles, and perhaps being able to challenge the status quo, it's imperative for a function such as ours.
Absolutely. Well done. And as you say, it's intentional. So you clearly thought this through very well, and good for you, because I think so often people make excuses or say, oh, well, we can't find any diverse individuals, or or just go to recruit in their own image, which of course isn't terribly helpful, not overall to the organisation, whether you work in Treasury or elsewhere. There's things you can add from different perspectives. So really, really, really important, and well done again. But something that has come up a few times that I've heard and experienced to some extent myself is where through COVID-19, because we're living in a virtual world, you'd think it might open things up more in some ways, and we touched on earlier that kind of fair around the table. There's no one dominant voice necessarily in a meeting. But what I've heard from a few people is that women are not showing up as much. So, and gender is one aspect of diversity, or shocks people diversity thought, I suppose. And some are saying that it's often the case that because of the working from home situation, in certain societies anyway, the women are expected to be doing more of the homeschooling or more of the cooking and cleaning if they no longer have any help, etc., etc., and they're finding it's taking them away from being able to focus on work. But I'm not sure that everyone would agree with that view. So maybe we'll move on to Garance, and then we'll have a quick round across the three of you to find out what your views are on that particular point.
Yes, well, this is a very interesting conversation, and also, before I answer specifically to that question, I want to take a time to celebrate the fact that, for example, Gogo and Laura, Gogo, you are in Hong Kong, which is a space that is very cosmopolitan by essence, right? So this society is used to, diversity of background. It's the same with Dubai, and Laura, I had a chance to visit Dubai a couple of months ago before COVID, and I was amazed by the fact that Dubai was such a cosmopolitan place, and I think that it's my case also in New York. So we've been exposed and we are exposed to different cultures living next to one another. I think that it's interesting to understand why this diversity is not being applied or institutionalized within a work environment. I can hear that, in your cases, my fellow panelists, you've seen that becoming more and more, intentional with an organization. I think that in the US, we're starting to have this conversation as well, but we have still a long way to go. I think that it requires a mindset shift, right? And for corporation and organization and individual in general to think, but why aren't we diverse, right? So not how can we be diverse, but more so why aren't we, and what have been the barrier, even cognitive or institutional, that have been not allowing us to create a space that is reflective of the makeup of our societies. To the issue of working from home and minorities, yes, minorities have been more affected by COVID. We know that socioeconomic individuals from socioeconomic studies that are lower middle class have been affected more than others for many different reasons, and these are sociological and institutional. And it's a longer conversation. Now, what is interesting though is that by everyone working from home, there've been this realization that workplace performance is a bit obsolete or artificial. When everyone has to work from home in front of a computer, where you don't have the veneer of a corporate room, of being dressed a certain way, showcasing a certain type of presence that is performative because you're a man or because you're an executive. But what is really demanded of you is just the value of your work because you are behind a computer, that is more informal. I think that that is also like helping to showcase who brings value and who doesn't. An individual who's been very comfortable by, performing power or decision-making power, um, now can be challenged to showcase like what is that you actually bring to the organization, as opposed to a mother of 5 or 3 or 2, or a person of color or both, who is like juggling many different like activities, but then is showing up and is bringing value, according or despite the little resources that they may have. So that is like one of my, my observation. And Caroline, lastly, you talked about music and piano, and as you can see, like working from home, I have the luxury of having my piano just next to me. Anyway, yes.
That's great, and that's part of this whole situation, isn't it? That we can see into your room, we can see your piano. And I was having a chat with somebody else recently, and she was talking about a project she's going to do, reflections on different people and the different two sides to them, if you like. So there's a photographer going to take a picture of her in her sari and of her in business clothing, Western business clothing. And she was reflecting on some of the different things that people learn as you are on these calls. You're let into somebody's home, you find out about their kids, their animals, their hobbies, all sorts of things that you wouldn't normally in a normal business relationship. So you're seeing this other whole side to people, which is actually an enhancement of diversity almost, because you start to appreciate people for maybe who they really are than that image that you saw that you related to someone who looked similar in the past. As they say, one grey suit looks like another kind of thing. And now you're actually seeing more difference, which is absolutely fascinating. Perhaps I'll turn to Gogo to reflect on that. Do you think we're seeing more difference? Do you think this has been a positive thing?
We are very happy to have arranged our a good mix of people with brought up in China and people brought up from Hong Kong. Actually, to other foreigners, it may be look like that China and Hong Kong is the same, but in fact, the education background and the university they study is different, and they have different background and culture. That we are very happy to learn from each group. The people from China are very happy to learn from people in Hong Kong, whilst people in Hong Kong are happy to learn from people from China. So it's a very good mixture, and they have different skills and they have different strong points or strengths and weaknesses. So it's really a good mix, and then we have a good culture as well. So I think we are doing fine. Of course, from our point of view, and I heard a lot of our friends working in other enterprises, the women's at work is always a little bit more, have more hardship compared with the gentlemen's. People can imagine that when the women are working, they have always have the responsibility to take care about their kids, and when they really work under the COVID-19, and then they have to have the quarantine period, and they have to work from home, and always there is a problem arise when you can imagine working from home have always comes with a set of challenges, of its own sets of challenges, and there's always a number of things which happen which draws it, which requires attention or call for the attention of the ladies. So anyway, we try as business leaders, we try to take care more to the ladies and understand their problem, and try really to have some how to say a readjustment or rearrangement of the job duties for the people who have some urgent tasks to do. We may change to some other staff which can be more flexible to work on time and immediately on urgent task. So there are quite a number of things that we can do. We encourage the people in this in the workplace to be more responsive to messages and emails or meetings, etc. But we do allow them to have a time lag for any of the responses. Thank you, Caroline.
Thanks, Gogo. That's a really interesting kind of concept and way of thinking things through. I think as we go into the last part of this panel, just reflecting on having a really good D&I strategy. Do we think that is going to bring us out of this crisis in a better way, to make resilience? And we touched on that in places, the discussion, but just thought if I get each of your opinions, and we'll stay with you, Gogo, for a moment, just to give your kind of final thoughts on how that can build us back better and more resilient by having that good D&I strategy.
From my point of view, in this time where the company is facing certain kind of market disruption or in economic instability, the business leaders need to try their very best to find out some strategies, either for basic survival, or to turn the challenges into opportunities. It is very important for the business leaders to find a very good strategies to deal with the situation. So this becomes a very important part, is that internally the company must have a very unified or friendly or high motivation staff team working for the business leaders, so that they have the strength to fight against the challenges externally. So that comes the time that really very important, that diversity and inclusion has been in place or should be continued to be in place, to make sure that the staff feel happy, feel appreciated, they're contented, they are engaged with their work, and whatever the business leaders want to achieve the targets, the whole team have a good team spirit, have good motivation to work together to support the business leaders to achieve their strategy goals, etc. So I find it very important. Diversity and inclusion is really important at times of resilience and business recovery.
Absolutely. Well said, Gogo. Laura, if I could turn to you to add your comments on this particular point.
Sure, Caroline. Yeah. I mean, absolutely, I think it's important to have a clearly set out strategy and policy with respect to diversity and inclusion. But what it comes down to for me is really, how do you make that something authentic, something meaningful, that's actually embedded in the way that the company does business. And I think maybe it's back to the point that Garance was making a little earlier about, what is the ethos and the culture of your organization? Is it a culture that really fosters and supports courageous conversations around diversity and inclusion? Or is it something that's just a policy, or, paying lip service to what might be seen as a trend, perhaps? So for me, it's really making sure that it's something that's embedded in the culture of the organization, and people are given room and space and freedom to discuss it openly. I also like the question that Garance posed earlier about, perhaps the question is not, how do we become diverse as an organization, but perhaps we should be asking ourselves, why are we not diverse? And I would, throw a question out there that, perhaps we might see that changing as, new entrants of the younger generation, new entrants come into the markets. Perhaps they will be putting more demands on companies in terms of what they stand for with respect to diversity and inclusion. I think perhaps the younger generation will be seeking out those companies that can demonstrate a track record in that regard. And those companies would be able to attract talent, through the way that they display themselves. And conversely, those that are not taking it seriously, or it's not on the agenda for them, perhaps would not be able to attract that talent that considers it to be a priority for their career and personal development. So perhaps we'll see a change by way of the demand of the new talent coming into the marketplace in future generations.
Absolutely, I think that's spot on there. That's all that we hear, and I think the younger generations coming will hold the rest of us to account on that point. And I liked your point about culture. There's a phrase that really resonates with me, and is culture eats strategy for breakfast. So it's all right having all of our strategies, but the thing that will really make the difference is the culture. But I'm going to turn to Garance now to reflect on this final piece. Please, Garance.
Yes, well, first of all, I think that panels such as this one, are really indicators that we are going in the right direction. Being on a panel, that you're leading, Caroline, and asking these very hard questions, to women who are in the four corners of the world, is a good signal that culture is changing, right? And that we are willing to have this complicated conversation. There is 3 points that I want to touch on, before concluding. Is first of all, I think that COVID-19 has showcased the fact that all sectors of society are very intimately interrelated. We had a public health crisis that affected education, that affected finance, that affected real estate, urban planning, and so we live, in an interrelated world. And so without diversity, a sectorial diversity, an appreciation for what different sectors, are bringing, we cannot create comprehensive solutions, right? And so this interconnection, demand this openness and getting away from our own speciality to understand in a more generalist way, what different strategies and what different approaches are needed. That's the first thing. Second of all, I think that yes, the issues of race and gender during COVID, and me being in the United States, with the Black Lives Matter movement, I've really created this issue of racism and diversity has been there forever, for centuries. So but this renewed conversation and it becoming more popular or more becoming more part of the mainstream is creating this very specific moment in time where a lot of change in the right direction can be made. Having women executives, having BIPOC being shareholders in company, having C-suite executives that are BIPOC, and women, are significant steps that are going to ensure true institutional change. And lastly, Laura, you brought up a very good point in terms of the new generations are by essence and by need and by design, we're more open, they have a vocabulary that allows them to talk about diversity in a way that we were not able to a couple of years ago or decades ago. And so there are new demands, there are new social contracts that are being, created in this new generation that are coming into the workplace. And I think that it is our job to ensure that we are opening doors for them to feel safe to have this conversation, and to also yes, for them to be able to build upon our thinking and the work and the conversation that we're having now. That's my final thoughts.
Thank you so much, Garance. Well, I think a great point to close on, and we could have spoken for a lot longer, all of us, on this very, very interesting topic. But I think some of the messages are clear. Diversity and inclusion is really important. It's going to build resilience. It's going to pull us through. And if we don't do something ourselves, then the younger generation are going to hold us to account on it. So very, very, very helpful, and we'll keep asking that question. Why aren't we diverse? So great point there. Thank you very much, Garance, Gogo, and Laura. It's been a pleasure talking to you today, and we'll see each other again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.